Alrighty, Cass, what we're seeing on our screen is your slides plus your notes.
Yep, I am working on that. You should
Okay,
be
perfect.
able
I
to
just wanted,
see.
oh,
How
there
about
you go.
now? You're just seeing the money and relationships window.
I
Oh,
can see the money and relationships window, and then behind it, I can see
close that
the
out.
slide
There we go.
deck. Oh,
Okay,
there we go. That's perfect.
cool. Give me just one moment over here. Well, I guess it's 12:01. We could probably get going.
Yeah, we've got quite a few more people popping on. We had over 70 folks sign up for today. So
Beautiful.
um,
We'll
we
handle
might
this.
have a few folks hopping on as we get started, but I can start with introductions. So, everyone, welcome to today's workshop, Money and Relationships. We have partnered with Mountain America Credit Union to come back and teach us all about financial wellness and all of the many things that go into it. So, today is the very first webinar that we are doing with them this year, and there will be many more to come. So, I'll put in the chat where you can sign up for those additional financial wellness webinars if you like what you're hearing today. Sign up for more of those, and I'll include some instructions in there. But without further ado, I want to introduce to you Cassandra Fuentes. She is here with Mountain America Credit Union. And you can see her on the top of your screen. Cass has come to Salt Lake County and taught us quite a few times within the last year or two, I believe. So we're happy to have her back. And Cass, I'll let you take it away.
Yay, thank you so much. Yes, we are so happy to be with you today to present some content on money and relationships. And this presentation is really there to address common questions and issues that come up in relationships where people share money. So for a lot of us, we think about, romantic relationships. Maybe we are married to somebody and we get to share money with them in that aspect. But this could also be platonic relationships. There are a lot of people who live together, and maybe share obligations like rent or utilities. And so we really want to help people be prepared for those things by thinking about how they would like to approach their finances that they might share responsibilities over, as well as goals and even, kind of what do we do about that relationship, or what are some things I should think about or know before I venture into that. So today our topics are really specific to these relationships. So we're going to talk through, what are some key financial topics that we want to discuss with our partners. Again, platonic or romantic. We want to recognize potential sources of conflict, because when we recognize those things, then we can start to create a plan to get ahead of it and move forward proactively. We also want to talk about some skills that you can practice that can help you address those differences. And so that's really the agenda that we'll be covering today. Now, as we get into this, I do want to remind you, please, yes, helping other parents with their money, great example. Please utilize the chat. I know there are several of us on here, and one of the best ways that we can communicate together and share our experiences or, tips and questions is to put that in the chat. And so please contribute there. And I really feel like, obviously, I'm here to give you some insights, but you guys have lived out this yourselves. And so if there's something, that really has made a difference for you, please share that with the group. So we're going to start with some key financial topics. As we get into this, it's really helpful for us to understand these topics, so that we can start to have these conversations. And whether you've been in relationship with somebody for a while or you are just starting, it's important to note that these discussions can help you really anticipate potential snags or, differences that you might run into. And it can also help you set some expectations for you and your partner, and how you will manage those finances as well as shared goals, and really help you make sure your money is accessible when you need it. So getting over here, we are going to talk through these key financial topics, and I'm going to spend time on each of these. But if you've sat through our Money in the Brain presentation before, some of these should feel familiar. So we'll talk through money scripts. We'll also talk about values and goals. We'll talk about why it's important to discuss credit history, as well as assets and obligations and joint or separate accounts. So getting into this first topic here, let's talk about money scripts. How many of you remember from maybe last year's presentation where we talked about money in the brain? How many of you remember what money scripts are? Go ahead and put it in the chat, like yes, me, whatever you want to put in there if you remember this. As I'm doing that, good. I see some thumbs up. Also, awesome. So if you don't remember or you haven't sat through one of our presentations before, a money script is essentially an idea, an attitude, or a belief about money. And these can look different for all of us. For example, some people have perceptions about why they budget a certain way or why they don't budget at all. I know for me, for a long time, my perception about budgeting was that it was hard and I didn't like it because I wasn't very good at it. And it turned out that that was negatively impacting my financial behavior. So it's important for us to understand our money scripts because they do impact our behavior, but they also impact our perceptions of ourselves and even others. And so when we're getting into money scripts, it's important for us to have an understanding of what our own money scripts are. And that's one of the things we want to do before we engage in a conversation with our financial partner. So think about what your beliefs are and how does that influence your feelings of self-worth or even your sense or of your abilities or your own happiness. Like I said, my example was that I am not good at money because I can't stick to a budget. But if we're given an opportunity to test that out and maybe even some different insights or a different framework that we can use, we might find that it's actually more easy than we thought. And it turns out I'm actually okay at budgeting. I just needed a really solid system to help me guide my money to where I wanted it to be. So another thing to think about as we are considering our money scripts is what might seem right or wrong when it comes to money. And that might be kind of weird, like weird to think about. Like you might not think that you have perceptions about how people should or should not spend their money. And I'll tell you that there really isn't a right or wrong way so long as it's helping you achieve your financial goals. But one of the things to note is that people do have these attitudes. And so it's important for us to understand our own. And then let's have that conversation with our financial partner. We can do this really by just kind of asking them, what are your thoughts and attitudes about money? And when we get that insight, it's helpful for us to kind of understand it. It really leads us to understanding why they do some of the things they do with their own money. And then it can, help us kind of determine if there's some relationship compatibility there to see if we think that they would be a good financial partner. Sometimes before I have a friend who, on her first date when she was dating, she'd ask people, what are your credit scores? Because she didn't want to get attached to somebody that might have things that get in the way of her financial dreams, and so that was really important to her. I love listening to people talk about money, and one of the reasons why is because we start to hear the things that they value in that. And I'll share a goal, or I'll share a quote with you later that really helps us understand why. But what you'll find is that money is very personal. And so it's really important for us to, approach that conversation gently. But kind of look at how you can approach that with them and really just approach it with curiosity to understand, because again, it will give you some key insights to understanding the reasons why they do what they do, or why they feel the way they feel about money. So once we go through money scripts, the next thing we want to think about is our values and goals. If we know this person is, feeling pretty compatible in that perspective, we'll start to want to think about what our shared values and goals are. And this is really kind of cool to get into because, as we've talked in Money in the Brain in the past, if we have a clear definition of what we value or who we ultimately want to become, we can start to build goals around that. And one of the benefits is that we can actually start to build some shared goals. Okay. And we'll get to that in just a second. One thing to note though is that with our values, these tend to be the things that we tend to spend our money on most often. And one thing to note is that our values don't necessarily change. Sometimes the way we manifest them or we live them out can look a little bit different, but for the most part, those things pretty much stay in place. Okay. So having this understanding of what our partner's values and goals are, again, can help us make sure that we are aligning and things are working in a compatible manner. And again, we can start to identify, what we can do together and maybe where we need to establish some boundaries as far as how we will share our finances and the things that involve our money. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. One thing I want to really touch on fast is, how important goals are to financial success, whether you're working on them independently or with a partner. Our goals that are the most effective are the ones that come from our values. Again, because there's a lot of motivation behind that, and it helps us kind of stick through when things get challenging. One thing that I want to call out is, we can have our own goals and that works really well, but there's actually some research that shows that shared goals can really have a positive impact on our relationships. And it's funny because they've done these studies where people are strangers, and they've found that even strangers who have shared goals actually end up having a positive relationship. So it's kind of cool to think about that. One of the cool things, that you begin to get, and I think a lot of people, talk about, well, why would you want to share money with somebody? Well, it kind of levels up the relationship, right? And it kind of takes us to a new level where we start to build a bond, and it can create a meaning for us and kind of help us think about our future. So keep in mind that shared goals can benefit relationships even beyond financial matters. And I think that that's a really cool idea because, again, our goal overall is for happiness and satisfaction in the relationship. And it's really like this is such an interesting space. So when we talk about, our happiness and satisfaction in our relationships, and even on an individual level, that can start to have a trickle down effect on things like our physical health and mental health. And it can even influence like our communication with others. So last thing I want to share with you about financial interdependence is that, if money partners are relying on each other to contribute, there does kind of create some accountability, and it can act as a source of motivation to maintain those positive money behaviors. So, that's why when we talk about goal setting, one of the things that we recommend with folks is that they set up, an accountability partner or an accountability buddy is what I like to say, right? And that really is because even if they're not doing the work, our accountability buddy, we know that we're going to check in with them and then we're going to have to report our progress. And we want to make sure that that's a positive outcome when we have to share that. So let me know if you have any questions in the chat. Next, we're going to talk about the credit situation. So when we are talking about the credit situation, this is really important for us. On an individual side, we have the ability to, kind of do our things, but there are some things that we may need to do together. And so our individual situations as, people in a relationship will absolutely have an impact on shared goals. And it can also be a reflection of our financial behavior, our credit situation. So it might be stuff like, well, are we paying our bills on time? And if we're not paying our bills on time, is it because there's like we don't have the willingness to pay it, or is it because we don't have the ability to pay? And then how does that affect, other things that we might have responsibility over? So if you decide to have a financial relationship with somebody, you want to be thinking about how does their credit score play a role in this? And then how do you safeguard your own finances and your credit situation to make sure that their stuff doesn't get involved in yours? So what I want to be clear is, like, if you do find somebody that you are in a relationship with and you find out that maybe their credit situation isn't great, that doesn't mean you need to break up with them, right? You don't need to end it and be like, sorry, I can't date you or whatever, or marry you. But it does mean, hey, maybe we need to establish some boundaries as far as like what we are willing to do together in our financial goals, um, so that we are not let down in the future, right? And we talk about that in a little bit when we talk about unmet expectations. That is one of the things that really leads to resentment and negative feelings in a relationship. And so it's really important for us to understand our partner's credit situation right? And even if you're in a relationship and you've been in a relationship for a long time, it's always good to just check in with one another, whether you share money or not. Maybe sit down if you are a couple who shares money. Maybe sit down and look through your credit reports together and talk through, maybe what the changes are or what your financial goals are. If you are managing that on your own, I'm on my second marriage, and my spouse and we do not share money except for our shared obligations. And so, I'd still share updates with them as far as like, hey, I saw this change in my credit score. Just letting you know. That way, if we do decide down the road, maybe we want to go buy something together, it's not a shock to them or a surprise that's something that is on my credit. So it's a good practice. Do you guys know where to go to get your credit report for free? Do you know where to go? Credit Karma is a good place to go. Yep, you can get your copy of your credit report for free there. You can also go to annualcreditreport.com. That by law, you are allowed to obtain one copy of your credit report from each of the three credit bureaus once a year. Okay. And annualcreditreport.com will provide it to you for free. I know Experian does allow you to look at your credit as well. So you can go through the major credit bureaus. I did have a question about, how do you manage shared goals and wants versus needs? And what if one person what if there's a difference there as far as like one person wants to splurge, and the other wants to focus on some things that are coming up, and how do you deal with that dynamic? That's a wonderful question. We are going to ask that. We are gonna answer that as we get further into this presentation. So thank you for asking that. How accurate is the snapshot of credit from a financial institution? So there are some things that you can look for when you are looking at your credit report in that snapshot. It will tell you which copy of the credit report they're using to generate your score and the date. So kind of keep that in mind. If the date is, if your credit score is from 3 months ago and you've experienced some financial changes, that may not be accurate, right? And so you just got to kind of keep that in mind as far as, what's the most accurate. Things that are happening more recently are going to be more accurate than, maybe the things that happened 3 months ago. Great questions. Okay, well, now that we've talked a little bit about the credit situation, let's talk now about assets and obligations. Okay. So as you talk about your finances together, you'll want to start to share details about assets and obligations, especially if you are looking at, like joining forces legally. In other words, marriage, but people can do this by, there's a few ways people can do that without necessarily getting married. Okay. So you really want to start by understanding what assets like investments, property, cash they have, and what obligations they have. Because once you understand that, you can start to understand your financial situation and their financial situation. And you can start to determine, where you want to join forces and maybe where you want to keep things separate. Okay. Like I said, having been in my second marriage and in my first marriage, we bumped heads a lot when it came to how we were spending money. And so now in my second marriage, I want to be able to say, this is how I want to spend my money. And so what I've done is I've said, hey, spouse, let's share these things together. And then you do money how you want to do it. And I will do money how I want to do it. And that's fine. Now, there's other things that you might want to think about, like obligations. Does your spouse have things like back taxes or child support? That might be something where if you get married, your tax return may now be impacted. Okay. Same thing on like if your financial partner sees a significant increase on the value of their assets, they may be obligated to take capital gains taxes, which again could potentially affect your tax return if you're married. So you really want to kind of seek out some advice from somebody like a tax advisor in the case of taxes, and kind of understand what what you want to take on together and what you want to keep separate. I have absolutely seen situations where, somebody has a sizable inheritance that they're, planning on getting, and they have decided that they don't want that as part of the relationship. Everybody is different, and there's not really a right or wrong way as long as it's working for you and you're maintaining that open communication. Okay. One thing to keep in mind, especially with debt, because I've seen this a lot, is somebody will come into the relationship with debt, and in an effort to help, their partner will offer to refinance, to help, get the debt paid down faster, achieve shared goals and create equity in the financial relationship. It's really critical in that situation to remember that once that debt is in your name, it doesn't matter who the original debtor is, because now you are both obligated to that debt until it's paid. Okay. Assuming that you've co-signed on it. If you have just refinanced it in your name, it is now your debt. And I share that with you because I've had several conversations with people where they've been stuck with their financial partner's debt, and there's no way to get out of it unless they go and refinance it themselves. And sometimes people don't have the ability to do that. Okay, the next thing that we're going to talk about is estate planning. It might seem a little weird to talk about estate planning as you're making plans with your financial partner, but this is really important to protect both of you and what you have vested into the financial relationship. It can also help mitigate some of the disruption that an event like a death can create on your partner's way of life. It can also help minimize conflict amongst loved ones and even help settle the estate. One of the things that couples tend, like a mistake that they tend to make is, when one of them works within the home, um, financial, they'll only get insurance for the family member or the partner who's working outside of the home. They don't realize, that it's a good idea to offer insurance for that person who works in the home, because, if something were to happen to that individual, you would want to be able to pay for the things that they do in the home, which actually create a lot of value. And if you hire out for those things, they cost a lot of money. Okay. Um, So depending on your wishes as a financial couple, it might be beneficial to work with a legal service to designate things like power of attorney, create a will, or change beneficiaries on your life insurance. I'll give you an example. So before I was married, I bought a home with my now spouse. We're both making the mortgage payments. And if something were to happen to one of us, um, if my spouse was the only person on the title, because we weren't married at the time, there is that possibility that the house could go into probate, and it would have to be worked out in court, or the financial owner would have to buy out. So if that were my spouse, before we were married, if he had passed away, I would have to buy out his share of the home, um, so that it didn't go to the heirs of the estate. And that can really create some conflict. Like I said, it can help. We ended up getting married for that very reason. But that it, if you don't have to always get married, you can choose to work with somebody that will help with settling these things, so that it's really, if something does happen, these things can play out nicely. But you can't do that unless you have a conversation about it. So the next thing we're going to talk about is just those joint and separate accounts. Again, I think a lot of people, because of their money scripts, default to, when I get married, we share an account, and that is the way we do it. And I'm here to tell you, you don't have to. It's really up to you on how you want to approach this, okay? But you get to make that decision on whether you want to keep your accounts separate or whether you want to join them together. Now, there are benefits and disadvantages to each of these, and understanding these benefits can help you really make the best decision for your situation. So, for example, with joint accounts, the owners have equal ownership of the account. Equal ownership means that you'll both have shared access to the account, and this can be really beneficial for things like the day-to-day transactions. It can also be helpful if something happens to one of the partners. Because there is equal ownership of the account, the other account would still be able to access the funds without any waiting periods. And I mean, I think a lot of people also enjoy the transparency and simplicity that just comes from managing an account and knowing where each owner is, and being able to see what they're doing together. I think a lot of people enjoy that. Okay. When we're talking about disadvantages of joint accounts, again, this is where it's really important to have had these conversations with your financial partner to kind of know more about them and what they're like. Because it's really, there are some disadvantages, like shared ownership of assets in the account, meaning that they can access the account the same as you. So if you have a lump sum of cash in there, they have access to that. Okay. And again, having that alignment can be really helpful. Other things to think about is like if owners have unexpected withdrawals or garnishments, that can absolutely affect you if that happens to your financial partner. Okay. You also have the ability to each make significant changes to the account, even up to closing the account. So it's really important to keep that in mind. And the last thing I want to cover on this is, especially in marital relationships, it's very common for one person to kind of take over and manage the account. And the other partner is more passive, meaning they just kind of like, whatever, and go along with it. So one of the things that can become a problem is when that person needs to start to manage their own money. I actually, I am very, very good friends with my former spouse. I'm lucky to be in that situation. And recently I was talking with him about an experience that he had with a financial institution, and they had recommended a product that wasn't quite right for him. And I said, well, why didn't you use this product instead? And he goes, well, Cass, you were the one who did all of this in our relationship. I'm still just learning. And I was like, oh my gosh. So, I mean, real world experience here. When you can both manage the account, it's going to be more beneficial. And yeah, to Jean's point, stay informed. It's actually better to have an individual account and you can name the partner as a beneficiary. Yep. Same with having some credit in your name, only not just jointly, because one may be given more credits for credit than the other. Um, yeah, so like if you are a primary borrower on a loan, um, if you are a joint owner, you'll each have equal obligation for that, right? And that should show up on your credit report. But let's say, for example, your spouse takes out a credit card, and lists you as an authorized buyer, you like that can show up on your credit, but that's ultimately their account, and they could kick you off of it at any time or close the account, and then you no longer have that reporting on your credit. So, yeah, definitely. My opinion is one where I think it's good to have a combination of these things in place. But again, everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different. Yeah, that can absolutely be a bit of a struggle. Um, especially if there's that income discrepancy that can make a big difference on things. So what are some things that we can do? I'm absolutely a firm believer that you can have a combination of benefits and mitigate some of the disadvantages as well, or the potential risks. So to overcome the potential challenges that we talked about, I think it's important to understand, where your financial partner is going to land on each of these financial topics. And then from there, you work together to agree on mutual expectations. So for example, I know a lot of couples who agree to discuss their purchases over a certain dollar amount. Like if it's over $40, we have a conversation about it before we make that purchase. One thing I think is like, to help maintain autonomy, you may even want to just set aside some money for each of you, ideally an equal amount, for you to use at your discretion, maybe in a secondary savings account, or I know at Mountain America, we offer the My Express debit card that you can use. And so you could just set it up so that when you get paid, $50 goes to each card, and that's what you get to use on whatever you want. So it is a best practice though to engage in account management activities together, or at least take turns managing the account, so that you each maintain those skills. So I've seen situations where folks will do, 3 to 6 months where they're actively managing, and then, in 6 months it changes over to the other partners so that they, continue to keep their feet in that. I've also seen people do date nights where they get together and talk about money. It sounds really romantic, I know, but it can be a really great way to discuss some of those things that, maybe have some higher emotions, or may, kind of feel like there's a little bit more conflict involved. Some additional solutions here. So if you don't want to put all of your money into a joint account, you can keep separate accounts, just like I said. So you can also, maintain these accounts while contributing to shared goals and obligations in a joint account. So you can absolutely have your joint account and then have your other account on the side. One thing that I would recommend, just because it can get kind of tricky if you are going in that direction, you want to make sure that you're equally dividing up the cost towards shared obligations and goals. So for example, in my house, because this is the method that we use, we have our grocery bill. We spend about $1,200 a month on groceries. And I'll usually pick up the stuff from the grocery store, and my spouse picks up the stuff from Costco because it ends up being about the same amount. And every few months we'll get together and just kind of calibrate and say, hey, what did you spend on groceries this month? This is what I spent, and if we need to make adjustments, we can. Okay. In some situations, especially if you're in a situation where you or your partner makes significantly more than the other, rather than setting up like a dollar amount, it may make sense to, do a percent of income. We want to save towards a vacation together. Each of us is going to contribute 10% of our income. Now, the person who's a higher earner, that's going to be a higher dollar amount, but that helps create some of that equity. Again, I think what you're looking for here is making sure that you feel like your plan is fair to everybody that's involved, and that you're able to cover both your individual and your shared obligations, and you're making progress towards your goals. Okay. So any questions before we start talking about some potential sources of conflict? I know I'm giving you a ton of information here, and so if we need to slow down, we can absolutely do that. But hopefully you're getting some ideas of, what are some questions that I can talk with my partner about, how can I, sometimes I get questions about, well, how do I approach this with my partner? I think maybe it would be better for us to share accounts. My advice there is just to kind of talk to them and ask them, how do you feel like this is going? And if they're like, oh, this is great, you can say, okay, I have a little bit of a different feeling here. I feel like it's more like this. One thing to note is, you are going to encounter conflicts. You are putting two different people into a relationship. And each of us, kind of has an idea about what we should be doing with our money or what we want to do. And our partner might feel a little bit differently. The most important thing, though, is I think it's all about respect. And what I would say is, if you do find yourself in a heated situation, let's take a break. I've learned that after many years of marriage. Sometimes it's better just to take a break and come back and talk about it when we're both feeling a little bit more calm. So, as we get into that, that's kind of a good segue for what we're going to talk about next with potential sources of conflict. Now, I've kind of alluded to this, but I want to share a quote with you, and I think it's pretty powerful. Okay. This is from Kyle Benson. He's a contributor to the Gottman Institute blog. And the Gottman Institute is, they do a lot of research on relationships. And so I think there's something really cool about this. Okay. So he says, money is loaded with power and meaning that can make discussions heated and hurtful. If you've been through this, you were probably like, yeah, I know. Arguments about money aren't really about money. They're about our dreams, our fears, and our inadequacies. And I think, again, when we're seeing that conflict, we need to come back to this. And I think there's a lot that can come from empathy in this, and trying to understand, where is this frustration coming from, or why do we feel these differences? And really trying to approach that in a calm manner. So there are these potential sources of conflict. Okay. But when we overcome these, it's really like when we understand what is lying beneath those conflicts, that's where the power is. Okay. So some of the things that we want to do or introduce to you to help you, kind of get a better understanding of your financial partner, and maybe you can pass this information along to them, is start to understand things like our spending styles, because we have different spending styles amongst each other. We also, have different emotions about money, and our emotions impact our behaviors. And then we also have different perceptions. And so when we understand these things, we can start to, have more compassion for one another, and really kind of get to a shared understanding, and hopefully alleviate some of that conflict. So getting into this, spending styles. So our spending styles essentially highlight the things that are most important to us, or what we value. And as you can see, there are 4 types and some examples of what each spender type tends to spend on. It's really good for us to understand our own spending style, because then we can start to think about how it affects the way we manage our money, and maybe we can make some changes to how we manage our money. Okay. When we understand our partner's style, it can help us recognize the areas that we might struggle together to achieve our shared goals or experience some of that emotional conflict. So, kind of looking at these spending styles, I'd love to hear in the chat, which one do you think you are? And note that you may be more predominantly one style, but you might have a little bit of another. As I'm sharing this, put those in the chat, okay? So I'll give you good. So some spender and giver, some saver. Yeah, spender, saver. Uh-huh. Good. Yep. Lots of givers in here. So I think that's really interesting because if you look at your behavior, you can start to see, how you start to spend your money. And it may not necessarily be like, oh, I love my kids, so I took them to Build-A-Bear last week. No, it might be I love them, so I am working on making sure that they are eating high quality foods. Like, it's not like, very cut and dry. I know for me, I tend to be the spender in my relationship. Like I love spending money on experiences and things that just make my life nice. So 100% yep, so donating money to your church, yeah, that's great. So like with my spending, that's where I like to spend my money. My former spouse was materialist. He really he grew up in a family that didn't have a lot of money growing up, and they struggled a bit. And so for him, being able to buy these really high-end items kind of was like an affirmation to him that he was past that in his life. Uh Hooked on Taco Bell. I love it. Well, that might be an experience thing, Rose. That could totally be like, just enjoying the nicer things in life. Um, so when I remember, right after my first spouse and I had gotten married, we went to the Gateway, and there was a store. Um, they sold high-end watches, and I can't even remember the brand now. But he was hooked on this $16,000 watch. And he's like, one day when I am rich, I'm going to buy that. And I looked at him and I said, why? Like, that is so dumb. Why would you even want that? I'm like, what is a watch is a watch, 16,000 or $16. It tells time. And I didn't care anything about it. But when it comes to my holiday traditions, you do not mess with my holiday traditions, right? And this is really, I'm telling you this to show you that reflection of like, we need to understand each other's styles so that we start to understand what is close to our hearts and what motivates us. And then we don't alienate our partner by telling them that's dumb. And so it's really important for us to recognize those. Now, sometimes these styles can get in the way of our financial goals. So if I am a spender, or even if I'm a saver, right? And my partner is a spender and they want to set a goal to go on vacation, that saving part may not be, it may look different for me than it does for my spender partner. My saver in me says, well, I want to set this aside for emergencies, or I want to plan ahead for retirement, or it would be nice to add to, my overall wealth. I want to be a millionaire, maybe, right? But for a spender, they're saying, well, I want to save my money to go to Hawaii and have a vacation with my family, and so you can start to see where there can be some conflict with opposite styles, or even just trying to achieve shared goals because we can't agree. So we talked a little bit earlier. Jean commented, what if one person wants to save for splurge and the other wants to save for a new microwave or furnace? Here again, we go back to values. Okay. So we want to splurge. I get that. Me too. I love splurging. In fact, like that is my jam. Maybe what we could do is we can agree that yes, the microwave or the furnace needs to be replaced. So how do we make both of those things happen? We have to prioritize, right? I can't survive a winter in Utah without my furnace. Believe me, I tried once. My furnace went down unexpectedly, and I tried to use my fireplace to heat my house. It was terrible. Um, so we have to recognize that's a need, right? And then we can start to prioritize things. Maybe we want to save for splurge. Well, what kind of splurge do we want to do? We want to spend $1,000 on a new TV? Okay, well, let's set a goal for that. If I want to buy a TV before next Super Bowl, I've got about 11 months. Let me set $100 aside for that. And I realize that's $100 aside a month that, we could be putting towards that furnace. Maybe we do need to, right? It comes back down to what do we value and what is most important to us. And if you get down to the nitty gritty of like, well, is family important to you? Yes. Okay, awesome. We can agree on that. Is having a home, like a shelter that works for you, important? Yes, we agree on that. Okay, cool. I know you want to spend money. Can we set aside, $50 a month that you can save up and do whatever you want with in a year? A lot of people, that's skipping out to dinner once a month for a lot of people. And so maybe that is a space. Or could that person go pick up a side hustle and put that money aside for themselves so that they can splurge it? There are absolutely ways that we can work around that. If you're finding that this is a conflict in your relationship or you're getting stuck on it, please schedule an appointment with a coach, because we can come in and we can help you, kind of lay things out objectively, and we can work together to prioritize those expenses, and we can talk about how we pick up, maybe what we're missing, and really help you find that happiness and fulfillment. But it can absolutely be a challenge, especially when our emotions are involved. And one of the things, pulling in another quote here, that we need to call out is that money is a major issue for couples. In fact, 50% or so divorces are a result of money conflicts. And it really is because, like nothing else we know of, our money provides the screen on which couples project all of their deepest fears, their hopes, and their hurts in life. So think about that. Next time you're feeling that tension with your partner about money, think about where is that coming from me? Because it doesn't have to do with money in most cases, right? It has to do with our perceptions, what we hope for, what we fear, and even some of, the things that we've experienced in the past where things have hurt. Okay. Next, I'm going to talk to you about emotions. So we've talked a lot about emotions in the context of money in the brain, right? We explained that emotions tend to be a big barrier for people when it comes to their financial success on an individual level, okay? But adding another person to the mix can absolutely impact your success, because now you get to work together as a team and you get to make decisions together about your finances. One of the things that I really love about this is this can be a system of accountability, but it could also create conflict. So one thing to note is how our brains operate. And again, if you've seen Money in the Brain, you recall this, but you're on a very basic level, your brain is really there to help you detect threats and rewards. Okay. I mean, it's much more complex than that, but for this purpose, your brain is there to understand what is there as a threat and what you could obtain as a reward. Now, when your brain perceives a threat, guess what? It sends hormones through your body, and those hormones are there to help you respond and help you neutralize the threat or obtain a perceived reward. This all happens really quickly through our limbic system. But then we have this other part of our brain that's there called the cerebral cortex, which operates a little bit more slowly, but can do those higher level thinking tasks for us. Okay. Let me just okay. Sorry, I'm going to make sure I'm staying on task here. So when we allow there to be that extra, minute to think through those things, we tend to make decisions that are more in alignment with the things that are important to us and the things that will bring us fulfillment. That's why those ideas of like, I'm going to wait 24 hours to make this purchase, or I'm going to go and talk to my partner about this spend before I do it, because it allows time for our cerebral cortex to activate and do the thinking to help us make sure that it really is in alignment with what we want to focus on when we're not feeling emotional. Another thing that's really important for us in the context of emotions is, again, now that we are managing this money with somebody else, it's really important for us to be aware of each other's coping strategies, especially when we experience intense emotions. One thing that I know I tend to do is like if there's a big thing that's happened in my life, we celebrate over food. It's usually, we go somewhere to eat that we don't normally go, or we go out on the town to celebrate. Okay. Conversely, on a rough day, if I'm feeling bad, I might take myself shopping. Home Depot is my place of peace because I like the way it smells, but I also get inspiration on all the projects I could start in my house. So that might be a behavior that might disrupt my spending plan with my partner, or it could take me away from my financial goals. So it's really important for my financial partner to understand this so that they can say, "Hey, I know you had a bad day today. How are you feeling, or what are you going to do about this?" And I need to be honest with them and say, "I did have a bad day. I really want to go do this, and let's have that conversation to help us stay focused." Okay? Um I think one of the things that really want to drive with this space is, it's important for us to think critically about how we respond to our emotions in the past. And let's make some mutual agreements about some boundaries, especially around our finances, that help us manage through those emotional situations. So, hey, I'm really excited that I just got this promotion and I really want to go celebrate. Okay, well, a month ago we talked about this because we thought this might be coming, and we agreed to spend no more than $100 tonight. Okay, we can agree on that, right? Or no more than $80, whatever it might be, right? And maybe by then you've even created a plan on how you want to, like, you've already started saving for that. There's so many things that we can do when we are proactively thinking about these about our emotions, and again, establishing plans and boundaries to help us stay on track. The next thing we're going to talk about here is our perceptions. So you and your financial partner's perceptions around what is happening with your shared monies and goals can have an impact not only on your financial relationship, but on your relationship as a whole. Now, we've already talked about money scripts, which will likely include some of our partner's perceptions about money and their beliefs about themselves and others. But it's also important to understand how some of these perceptions that you see here can influence your behavior, and how you can identify conflict and find ways to address them before it creates contention between you and your financial partner. Again, proactivity. Okay. So, one of the first bullets that we see here is social and economic pressure. And there are a few things that may come to mind. For example, there's still this common expectation amongst Americans of all races that in a heterosexual couple, the male is expected to be the primary breadwinner. You guys, it's 2024, and there's still this common perception that this is happening. Okay. Now, one study that we looked at indicated that the likelihood of divorce increases by 50% in marriages where a female earns more than the male. Isn't that interesting? So, in addition to potential conflicts about household responsibilities, in situations where the female makes more money and the male partner has this expectation or belief, he might feel more pressure to increase his income. And that could lead to some feelings of insecurity, frustration, or even resentment, which we know aren't really good things to have in a relationship. So, understanding your beliefs and challenging your beliefs can help you alleviate this pressure that may be perceived. One of the things that I love, because I kind of grew up in the psychology world, and kind of love this, is to think about a cognitive behavioral therapy technique where you ask yourself three rational questions. So the three questions are: is my thinking based in fact? Is it true? And does this perception help me achieve my goals? And does this perception make me feel the way that I want to feel? Now, if you were to go back to that example where, the female spouse is earning more than the male, well, is it true that that I am not as good as my spouse? Probably not. We work together really well, and um, is it true that I have to make more money than my spouse? No. No. In fact, if you're making money and they're making money, cool, right? Is it helpful for my goals to believe that I need to make more money than my spouse? No, not really, right? As long as we're making money and we're moving closer, that's what's important. And does it make me feel the way I want to feel? I don't ever want to feel insecure. You guys, I hope you feel the same. And so if it's not a helpful thing for us, let's offload that. We don't need that. Okay. In fact, like my spouse and I, we love to compete for highest salary. Right now he's ahead of me. That's okay. I'm happy with that. And I hope that he would be supportive of me if I am the one who ends up making more than him. I think we both hope for that. Another example of perception can be this need to keep up with our friends and neighbors. And this can create conflict, especially if one of you values a social relationship with somebody more than the other. And so it's really important for us to go back to the why, what, how model that we talk about in Money in a Brain. And I'll show it to you again. Yes, keeping up with the Joneses. Let's let our values guide the way that we want to spend our money rather than trying to worry about what our neighbors and our friends are doing, okay? Let's also talk about this perception about unequal opportunity to spend or access funds. Okay, so there was this article published. It's called Tightwads and Spenders. It was published by BYU. And they actually report that studies show that husbands perceiving wife as a spender is the highest contributor to financial conflicts. Wives being perceived as a spender, what did I write here? Wives being perceived as a spender is the highest contributor to financial conflict. Also high when wife viewed husband as spender. So if we perceive that one person has more access to spending the money, then that creates some conflict. Maybe a perception of unfairness, right? So having that awareness of our perceptions can really help us ask our financial questions with our partner and seek clarification. And really, the focus is on just maintaining that open communication in your financial relationship. Okay. And then the last one is about the capacity to make financial decisions. So financial partners can experience conflict when they disagree about their financial roles and responsibilities. And sometimes, like we saw, there is a perception of, well, if I don't make as much money, then I need to contribute more in the home, which may not necessarily be the case. Those two things, home responsibilities and money, can be separate. I think one of the things that we want to do here is we really want to focus on strengths when it comes to the capacity to make financial decisions, and let's leverage each other's strengths, right? But really focus on distributing that work again so that people aren't stuck managing the money while others are doing it passively. And then if something happens in that relationship, that person who's been managing it passively or not managing it at all, we don't want them to fall behind. Let's talk really quick. One more thing on perceptions here. Perception is not reality, okay? But it is one's experience of reality. So we need to, have some empathy about that and have some compassion. The more someone does to understand all the facts that are related to an experience, including having empathetic understanding of another's perceived experience, the closer the perception nears reality. When we can put ourselves in our partner's shoes and understand what they're feeling, then we can start to say, oh, okay, I can see why you're feeling this way, or why you are experiencing this, the way you are. All right. So to wrap up, kind of going back to what we've covered in this section, really understand your potential sources of conflict. Is it in having different spending styles? Or is it about your emotions and how you cope with good and bad days? Or is it about your perceptions around finances? And having these conversations openly with your partner can kind of help you understand where some of those weak points are, and you can start to work to address the differences, which is what we're going to talk about next. So let's remember that many of our money conflicts that are surfacing are less about money and more about our spending styles and our emotions and perceptions. And so there's some frameworks we can use to help us manage through the conflict. One of those things is practicing radical generosity. And I'm going to go into detail with each of these. We're also going to talk about the why, what, how model, and then we'll wrap up with using mindfulness to manage through our financial dilemmas. So radical generosity is kind of this idea of giving while expecting nothing in return. How many times have we done something for someone else without that experience of reciprocity? I think there's actually a lot of power in that, because again, our unmet expectations are the ones that create the most frustration and angst, okay? Another thing that can help us with practicing radical generosity is, again, putting ourselves in our partner's shoes. So let's understand why they're feeling the way that they feel about something, okay? Again, we can tie the decision we can tie these things together. Like you don't have to choose one or the other in most cases. We can give a little bit from one part to, you know, kind of help meet that need. Just like I had mentioned with the example that you guys brought up in the chat, you know, we can set money aside if we have it in the budget. If we don't have it in the budget, let's work together to come up with that cash to make that happen. Okay. And then lastly, let's work on making a daily habit of contribution and gratitude. You guys would be amazed, you know, gratitude is really beneficial when it comes to helping us practice that radical generosity, especially when we are not expecting anything in return. Gratitude allows us to notice the good things that we are experiencing and the good acts that we have shared with others. And when it comes to practicing gratitude, research actually suggests that we tend to spend and save better when we regularly experience gratitude in relation to our money. Expressions of gratitude can also positively impact our relationships. It can improve our sense of well-being because of the hormones this, you know, circulate into our brains. And it can really be as simple as just listing off a few things that we're grateful for each day, reflecting on really difficult past times, or even just saying thank you. Now, one thing I want to call out, you know, is I see a lot of situations where, you know, maybe there's a parent in the home and there's some income disparity there. And sometimes there's a sense of, well, I'm out earning the income, therefore I get to decide how I'm spending it. Or, you know, maybe they need to go find something else, you know, to supplement if they want to spend. I just want to point this out. Okay. This is older data. It's from 2022, but the average value of a stay-at-home parent is almost $130,000. Okay, that's taking into consideration things like childcare, personal shopping, cooking, keeping the house clean, you know, driving around. My boss calls my picking up my kids and taking them home, you know, every day, my Uber shift. And it really is, right? These things add value to our families' lives. And it's really important that we take these things into consideration when we're thinking about equity in the relationship, when we're thinking about ensuring those in the home, we really want to make sure we have these things covered. Okay, next we talk about the why, what, how. If you've never seen this before, this is essentially a framework to help you identify your motivation and guide you as you find your way to your shared financial goals. So you start first with the why, which is really your values and who you ultimately want to become. And then you create goals around those values. So if I'm doing this with my partner, I want to find shared values, things that we agree on, and then let's create some financial goals around those things that we agree on. The how section is really just helping you create that action plan. What are the tasks you need to do to make sure that that goal is you see it through? Okay. Now, when we're talking about applying the why, what, and how, remember, get together and talk about your whys. They may not be in exact alignment, but let's come together on the things that we do agree on. And then let's define those goals and commonalities and motives and build off of that. When we're talking about the, you know, those conflicts, again, rank your items of importance and then start to establish the order that you're going to achieve them in. Determine what it's going to cost and really use the how to create a plan. List out the steps that you're going to take to make sure you see that goal through. And then, you know, because we're human, we want to make sure that we avoid messing up or falling off track. We can consider our potential barriers. Okay. Now, what happens if I get stuck? Again, use mindfulness. Understand why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Try to understand where your partner is coming from. Work together on your why, what, and how. And when you are in a situation where you want to divert from that, come back to it. Come back to why and remember why you guys are managing money together and what goals you've set together. And then finally, adopt an abundance mindset. So Franklin Covey coined this term abundance mindset in the release of the 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. And the abundance mindset is essentially a belief that there is plenty for everyone. Now, having this mindset can help you, especially in these moments where you're experiencing a perceived threat. And it can also help you in the long term as you shift your narrative or the story that you tell yourself. It can go from scarcity to abundance, and then you can start to set appropriate boundaries to manifest the desired reality. Now, again, some of these things are going to take some time to work through and implement, but that is something that can be really important. You guys, I apologize. skipping through slides here. So as we wrap up today, we do have some action items for you to take with you. We never want you to sit through a presentation and go, well, that was cool, not do anything with it. We really want you to do something with this information. So, you know, whether you've been in a relationship for a long time or you're just getting into it, discuss those key financial topics with your current or potential financial partners, okay? Look for potential sources of conflict in your financial relationships and start to proactively manage those. I love the idea of practicing mindfulness and radical generosity, even if it's, you know, maybe you're not in a financial relationship with anybody right now, but you have kids. This is a great place for you to leverage that. And then access that why, what, and how. You can do that by going to macu.com/brain. I'll put that in there so that you guys can access that, okay? But definitely go in and do that activity, start to understand what your motivations are, and really create that framework for achieving your goals and holding yourself accountable to that. As a reminder, we do offer some specific resources. You know, you can visit macu.com/guide. And like I said, if you ever need help with if you ever need assistance as far as, you know, getting on the same page or just meeting with a financial coach, that is available to you to do for free. So I know we're a little over time. I will wrap it up and turn it back over to Brittany. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. I'll hang out for a couple minutes and answer those if they come up. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Cass. We really, really appreciate your time and expertise that you share with us every single time that you come on and teach us. For one, I've heard about money and relationships before, and obviously I've experienced that within my own life, and I learn something new every single time. I love today how you talked about understanding not only your script, but other people's script as well when it comes to money scripts. You know, we all experience life differently and have different thoughts on financial situations. And hopefully, listening to what Cass had to say is that it takes that scariness, takes those big emotions out of some of these conversations, and that you guys are able to turn to your own relationships and have good, productive conversations based off of the tips and tricks that Cass gave us today. So again, thank you everyone so much for joining. Cass and I will stay on for a few moments, but be sure to sign up for some more financial wellness webinars as they come in the upcoming months. Thanks, everyone.